last year, um, after the death of George Floyd and other Black lives, truly highlighted and exacerbated the inequities that exist in the United States. So, for example, when we are looking at developing diversity and inclusion plans and becoming more diverse, it is about the statistics, but it's also about everything that's happening in our society. Before moving on into the model that I will be highlighting for this presentation, I just wanted to give you like a really quick overview of some of the leadership theories and paradigms. Because when we talk about becoming an inclusive leader, we also need to understand implemented all across the United States. As you know, before the 1970s and the 1960s, pretty much in an industrial society. So that time, we needed to have a particular type of leader, and it was more like a manager leader. The leader was not typically inclusive to women, not typically inclusive to diverse people, and it was more of a hierarchical approach of leadership, meaning like top-down approach. As we move out of the industrial area, we went into what we call the post-industrial leadership theories. So even right now in the 21st century, a lot of the leadership theories that you come across, Tech leadership, servant leadership, truly fall within the post-industrial leadership realm. And this paradigm truly highlights a relationship-based type of leadership. It also believes that anyone can be a leader given the tools. It is focused on shared goals and leadership, is collaborative, is values-based, and it also results in positive social change or positive change for the organization. The post-industrial leadership paradigm focuses on leaders and members working together, and it is team-focused, mutual purpose, and it is also based on values, ethics, and motives. It is also very centered on the leader itself and the inner leadership and making sure that we are becoming the best versions of ourselves. So these are the two paradigms that continue to kind of guide our society in terms of leadership. But there's this other brand new emerging paradigm that continues to grow. Currently, we don't have a lot of leadership and a lot of theories in this area, but we are continuing to look at leadership that is focused on the diversity of the leader, leadership that is inclusive, that is equitable. Also, we are looking at dimensions of leadership when it comes to like values as seen as assets. We are looking at intersectionality and how that plays a role in how we make decisions, how diverse people lead, and also how inclusive leaders are currently leading across the United States. So this new emerging paradigm really focuses on a diverse lens to solve complex and global issues. And pretty much this is the paradigm that we kind of need right now. This is the kind of leadership that we are going to focus for this presentation. This new emerging paradigm that truly focuses on really thinking outside this box, right? We have been doing things in a pretty systematic way, I would say, and it's time for us to truly, if we want to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, to embrace new ways of leading and new ways of seeing the world. I also want to say that I do completely agree with the post-industrial leadership paradigm, and I believe that anyone can be a leader if given the tools and the opportunities and the access to be that leader. We all know that leadership is socially constructed. It also can be learned, and leadership can be fluid, and it also evolves over time. So I just wanted to point that out for a bit. So having talked a little bit about the leadership theories and the leadership paradigms, I'd like to focus the next, I would say 30 minutes on the linkage inclusive leadership assessment model. And I'll base my conversation around the three buckets. The three buckets being the leadership, the leading self, leading relationships, and leading culture. And as we go through the presentation, even though we have these 3 different buckets, please know that all of these buckets are interrelated, even the dynamics outside of the buckets. They're interrelated, they're connected in many different ways. Sometimes we may find ourselves leading ourselves and implementing ways to become a better leader. Sometimes we find ourselves truly leading relationships and leveraging those relationships. And sometimes we find ourselves truly being agents of change and impacting the culture of our respective organization or team or unit or division. So I will be using this model to guide our conversation. Also know that even though we have this model, I have added certain components that I think are relevant to the conversation and that are key as we go into the presentation. Okay, so I'll begin with leading self or leads self as the first bucket. And one of the main things for inclusive leaders is that we have to be authentic and we have to be open and fluid as well. What that means is that we have to do the inner work. That means that we need to know who we are, we need to know ourselves, we need to have a really good sense of personal awareness, especially when it comes to inclusion and equity. We have to do the inner work to understand what are some of our biases. Do we have implicit biases? What are my thoughts when certain situations come up and I don't know how to deal with those situations? What are my perceptions of people who are different from me? And what are my actions? Are my actions being guided by my values, by the organizational mission? What are my actions? So the inner work entails, and it's something that is super important in the whole realm of leadership, being able to do the inner work to become a better human being, a better professional, and a better leader. Inner work being, who am I? What are my values? Where do I fall short? Am I aware of my own bias? Do I accept or embrace differences? Another dimension is having an equity and inclusion mindset or equity mindedness. And this is a movement that is happening right now, especially if for inclusive leadership, you need to be able to look at the world, look at yourself from an equity lens. And that entails asking questions about, do I look at my work through an equity and inclusion lens on a daily basis? What about when I'm part of a team meeting? Am I looking at the decisions that are being made from an equity lens? Am I asking the questions about who's here and who's not here to make these decisions? Do we have diversity of thought? Do we have racial diversity? Also, am I race conscious, or am I one of those people that call myself colorblind, like I don't see color, which I've heard a lot from a lot of different individuals? Am I aware of historical and systemic inequities within my space, within my context, within my organization? Am I advancing DEI work within my unit or organization? So developing an equity mindset is really key as we develop the inclusive leadership style. Also being authentic, right? And this talks a little bit about the character of the leader or your own character. Am I leading with purpose? Do my values and principles guide my decisions? Do I lead with my heart? Am I empathetic? Can I be myself in this space? And I think when it comes to authenticity, this is really key. Sometimes it becomes difficult because many of us have to code switch, right? We have to make sure that we adapt to the different workspaces, the different styles, right? But we still, at the very core, have to remain true to who we are. Inclusive leaders are also open-minded. And that means, am I open-minded when it comes to solving issues, responding to conflict? Am I open-minded when there is differences and I need to fully understand? So when it comes to being authentic and being open, you have to do the work, the inner work that is so critical when it comes to becoming a leader. We have to continue to develop an equity and inclusion mindset. We have to be authentic and we have to be open-minded. Another dimension is of leading self is also being courageous. And I have to be honest, this is one of my favorite ones. And not because I consider myself a super courageous individual and I'm always like pointing out things, but it is my favorite one because it is also something that I continue to work on, being courageous. Inclusive leaders challenge mindsets and practices. So what that means is that are we calling out bias or racism, discrimination, or any other incidents when we see them or when they happen? Do we have established processes for addressing bias and racism within our units, within our spaces, within our organizations? And also, are we developing accountability measures for diversity hires, for retaining a diverse workforce, and also promoting diverse individuals? Inclusive leaders challenge their own biases and take courageous actions to mitigate the bias or biases. And I think this particular point is critical in our development as inclusive leaders because this takes up a lot of work and we have to look inwards and kind of understand, okay, this is how I feel about this particular issue or this particular group of individuals, and I need to change, right? So how do we dismantle the implicit biases that we all have, right? Inclusive leaders have the courage to do what is just, what is right, and also what is difficult in order to influence positive change. What I do have to say based on the last 18 years of professional work experience is that being courageous is probably one of the most valuable behaviors when it comes to being an inclusive leader. And is one of the most valuable assets, but also one of the most difficult and challenging, right? Especially when it comes to not only challenging bias and racism within our workspaces, but also challenging our own thinking and our own thoughts. Another aspect of leading self is having a values perspective. Inclusive leaders understand their values, what values mean to them, and what priorities values play in their life. Okay, and different people define values differently. So as you know, diversity of thoughts, diversity of values, diversity of ethnicity and race, diversity of sexuality, diversity of ability and disability, that comes into place, but also the way we see the world and what kind of experiences have shaped our values. So for instance, my values are set in stone, right? My personal values and why I work in higher education. But I also know that as I move into a senior leadership roles, my values will continue to evolve. I also know that as a Latina who was a low-income first-generation college student, my value for making sure that low-income and first-generation students have access and opportunity in higher ed, it's always going to be there. I don't think that's something that will ever go away. But there are some values that might evolve and might change, throughout your lifetime. Inclusive leaders understand differences and why those differences exist. So, for example, as a leader, as an inclusive individual, we all have to make an effort to continue to learn from one another, to continue to ask those critical questions about why those differences exist. If that means if it's related to culture, if it's related to leadership style, if it's related to values, we have to be able to continue to work on ourselves and understand those aspects. One example that I can give you as far as differences. So, for example, in my work, I often see we have the individualistic cultures versus the collectivistic cultures. So as we know, a lot of us, people of color, we tend to have a collectivistic culture where we are not only looking up to one leader, but we are looking at all voices, right? We have a group consensus and group focus. We believe in consensus when we make decisions. We are basically looking at the whole group, at the whole unit, I'm sorry, versus when we work with individuals who might be from a European background, they might have more of an individualistic culture, right? When we are looking to work with women, we have a different culture just because gender has played a role, especially in the United States. So we have to be able to understand these differences and why these differences exist. So the second inclusive leadership bucket talks about leading relationships. And this is one of the, is a very important aspect of leading and being inclusive. And I'll tell you why. For one, inclusive leaders are willing and able to adjust their communication style for the context and situation. So what that means is that we have to be able to communicate adaptively. So for example, if we are managing a team, if we are working with a team, I have seen many situations where maybe the supervisor wants to enforce their communication style on the entire team and doesn't truly understand how to balance their communication style with the communication style of the entire team. So we have to be able to not only adapt to other people's communication and leadership styles, but we have to make sure that we are willing to reframe our communication style, that we are willing to do it for the team, right? We can't always have it our way. And as inclusive leaders, we have to be able to have that balance of being able to say, you know what, this is at this time, I need to adapt my communication style for the betterment of the team, okay, to make sure that we are accomplishing that goal or the mission of the organization. Competency is related to inner self and work. So for instance, communicating adaptively has a lot to do with your habits, with your patterns, and your attitudes. I know what I said earlier, that we have to be able to reframe. That takes skill. It's a really hard skill to have. So we have to continue to work on that. And that entails making sure that we are evaluating our habits and our patterns and our attitudes and the way we adapt to different situations. And my example and my questions related to this concept include, am I able to reframe my thinking to adapt to a situation? Can I adapt my behavior to make others feel more welcome and included? Inclusive leaders adapt to meet the needs of other people, to negotiate relationships, especially to attain win-wins. Inclusive leaders are highly flexible and versatile. And one of the quotes I have here is that adaptability is about the powerful difference between adapting to cope and adapting to win. And of course, we all want to win, and we want to have win-wins. Another dimension in leading relationships is building and connecting relationships. And I cannot tell you, as an inclusive leader, this is set right now. Building relationships and building connections and cultivating those connections and relationships goes a long way. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you are building a relationship with the CEO, with the mid-level directors, with the entry-level professionals. It doesn't really matter. I think the inclusive leaders has to have the ability to be able to make connections and build relationships with just about anyone. Inclusive leaders focus on relationships and collaboration to engage, empower, and motivate. So that contributes to building a culture, to building change and building a culture of inclusion and a culture where you are welcoming and respectful of all people. Again, relationships are key. And it doesn't matter what kind of relationship. It could be your supervisor, employee, your peer-to-peer relationship, the relationship with your customers, your department, your board of directors, the relationship that you have with other power brokers of your organization. Because as you know, we have positional leaders within our companies, but we also have those leaders that we call the power brokers. They might not be in a positional leadership role, but they for sure are well known, and they have a lot of institutional memory and a lot of power in that way. We also have to build relationships with the community and build relationships with others as well. For diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts to work, we must foster relationships and excellence in all that we do. I always say, put people first, right? And everything else will follow. Also, results, when you focus on relationships and connection, that will result in greater learning, innovation, and creative problem solving. Another dimension in leading relationships is facilitating development. Inclusive leaders embrace, accept, and affirm all people for who they are. Inclusive leaders allow people's unique abilities and perspectives to flourish. So for instance, using micro affirmations and acknowledgements can go a long way. Inclusive leaders create nourishing spaces for belonging and are vocal about DEI. So for instance, one example that I can tell you is that in my work at Marquette University in the last 14 years, we have different offices that do different types of trainings. And typically at the end of the training, you get like a sticker that you can put under your signature. So for instance, one of them is safer spaces training, and making sure that you are that you have the rainbow flag and things like that. That could be one way that you can be more inclusive. Because remember, when we are working with the LGBTQ community, for instance, that could go a long way of you saying, I am an ally and I am here to advocate. I have seen multiple people that have different types of stickers in quotes under their signature, work signature, and that goes a long way, believe it or not, especially for someone who might be feeling isolated or excluded. That's your way of saying, I am open and I am here for you, and I understand that I might not know everything, but I'm here for you. So I recommend that if you're able to do that, to do so. And we know that belonging is a huge issue when it comes to organizational change and climate. So we want to make sure that we continue to encourage spaces where people can have a shared identity, spaces where they can be their full selves, safe spaces as well to talk about the different issues that are happening all around us and within us. Inclusive spaces, I know ERGs, employee resource groups, are definitely moving the needle when it comes to belonging and retention and promotion of diverse individuals, and also encouraging people to participate and be part of the mission of the institution or company. One thing that, let's see here. So all of this also results, again, in greater team performance, employee engagement, productivity, and belongingness. We also know that when you serve as a support person and that you are empowering individuals and motivating them, you're also giving them more confidence and also an opportunity for them to excel professionally. Now we're going to go into like the third bucket for inclusive leadership, and that's leading culture. So mission, vision, and values. The inclusive leader aligns their personal mission to the mission, vision, and values of the organization. So for example, at Marquette University, I held 3 different positions on campus, and I always worked to make sure that whatever we were doing truly align with my personal views and also some of my personal opinions, because that was a lot easier for me to do. But also there were times when some of the things I was asked to do didn't truly align with some of my mission, some of my values and mission. However, I was able to make sure that there was alignment in all of this, right? Because at the end of the day, we are working for an organization, a company, and an institution, and we want to make sure that as inclusive leaders that we bring ourselves or whole selves to the table, but we're able to have a balance and some sort of alignment in all of that, right? I would say that sometimes there could be things that happen and you might not fully agree, and you have to really go inside and think about the decision and maybe find some ways to resolve that tension point. But I always recommend that please work towards alignment, because that's kind of like a win-win. The last thing we want is to like go home and vent about like all these other things and disagreements, and we want to make sure that there's always a focus on commitment, results, outcomes, and alignment. Inclusive leaders build capacity and contribute to transformational cultural change. One thing that I have to say is that all of you are here spending an entire hour to learn about this concept, and that shows your commitment. And as you continue to become more inclusive, an inclusive leader, we also have the responsibility to build capacity. So as I am sharing this information with you, we can also continue to share it with others, and also bring other people to this space, right? Because not everybody gets that, and that's the reality. We want to make sure that we build capacity, because diversity, equity, and inclusion work is everyone's work. Inclusive leaders are ethical. Integrity requires paying close attention to one's intuition, impulses, and motives. And that also goes back to your inner self work, right? Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? How do I contribute to the mission of the institution? And how do I make sure that my bias are not getting in the way, and that I am doing the best I can with the resources that I have? Leading culture, sharing authority, power, and credit. And this is really key as well when it comes to changing culture and transforming culture. Inclusive leaders practice cultural competency and cultural humility in all interactions. And I have a little note here. We give credit where credit is due. Inclusive leaders believe in shared leadership and shared power. So what that means is that shared decision making with a focus on sharing the power. For example, if you are part of a team of 20 and you're leading that team, you want to make sure that your team feels empowered to share ideas, to lead efforts for a project, and also that they feel empowered to be the outcome. If you are, for example, in a meeting and you need to make a decision as to where to allocate $100,000, you want to make sure that your staff, your employees feel empowered to be able to make the decision along with you. When it comes to inclusive leadership, it is not a hierarchical. It is not a pyramid anymore. It's more of a collective approach, more of a circle. So when you're looking at becoming or being and continuing being an inclusive leader, you want to make sure that you are looking at things from a collective approach, right? Where everyone is a leader and you are able to share that power with everyone, and everyone has a stake. And I just wanted to say that in the United States, power has often been associated with a control and top-down approach. But in terms of power, in terms of leadership, and if you look at the entire landscape of the United States and who the leaders are, or the CEOs and CFOs, we know that Power and leadership has often been associated with cisgender, able-bodied, heterosexual white men. And it has always, not always, but it tends to be a male-centric kind of leadership style. As we know, when it comes to being inclusive and when it comes to DEI work, we need to shift away from those notions into this new lens of being an inclusive leader who employs a shared leadership approach where power is shared and members are empowered. Inclusive leaders are not managers, and we are not egocentric. We are a team-centered leader who fosters teamwork and collaboration. So, you know, I won't say names or anything like that, but I have seen, I have worked with a lot of different people who are in positional leadership roles, and sometimes they are not guided by the mission or the vision of the company or institution. They're mostly guided by their egos. And again, we have to do that inner work, and we have to do the critical inner work that is required for us to identify when our ego is leading and when we are leading by purpose. And in terms of leading culture, as we know, inclusive leaders, and let me just say, it doesn't matter what position you currently have in your company or organization or in the community. You can be an inclusive leader in your space, and you can definitely contribute and influence the climate and the culture of your organization. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this whole entire presentation is that you are powerful and you have the power to do that, even if it's just within your team or department. But also know that by building a climate of trust and respect, you are contributing to the entire culture of the organization. Inclusive leaders work across differences to help build an environment and climate where everyone can thrive and flourish. And this is so key. And I say this because, as we know, it doesn't matter the sector. There are groups of underrepresented individuals who do not feel a sense of belonging, who are not thriving, and they are not flourishing. And we want to make sure that as inclusive leaders, that everyone has that access and opportunity to thrive and flourish. We also want to continue to build trust and respect and that feeling of safety, and that's a climate issue. Inclusive leaders work to address workplace bias, discrimination, racism, sexism, and other issues. And this is also really key. In the last year, I would say there has been a trend of multiple organizations, not just in Milwaukee, but across the United States, where, for one, we don't have processes and protocols for addressing racism. We don't have processes and protocols for addressing anti-Blackness in the workplace. We don't have pretty much any protocols in place, and we need to. We need to continue to develop these protocols and these processes and address these issues immediately as they come. This is a big issue that we need to tackle, and I hope that you can help all of us continue to develop those protocols and processes to make our cultures and our organizations even better. Inclusive leaders make bold and courageous decisions, and we talked about that earlier. And that comes with being transparent and also having personal accountability. When you are making a decision and you are stepping up and you are saying something, there has to be accountability as well. We understand that the struggles of a diverse workforce and when we work collaboratively to create a sense of belonging for all. Okay, we are at 11:49, and we have until noon. I've been talking a lot, and I just wanted to give you just a little bit of time. Maybe let's spend the next 7 minutes to talk about what I just said, and maybe bring up any type of questions that you have. And also, I am interested in learning about what does inclusive leadership mean to you, and how can you become even a greater inclusive leader? If you don't feel comfortable opening up, that's completely fine. But I just wanted to, kind of hear from you a little bit before we wrap up. And I'll stop sharing my screen. Okay. Hi, everyone. So I went over the inclusive leadership model, and that's a lot of information. And to be honest, there is no way that we can cover everything in 1 hour. But I do want to hear from you. What is it going to take for us to become more inclusive as leaders? Or where are you? Or what are some of your questions in relation to that?
I guess I'll start. So what would you recommend to someone who, an entry-level professional, and isn't in a department where there's like that shared power, right? That shared leadership, shared collaboration. Like what can we do as like early career professionals to to address that within our department or within our organization, that need for like shared power and giving credit where credit is due.
Yes. And one of the wonderful things that I have come across when I used to manage a team on Marquette's campus, I managed a team. Everyone was super diverse in terms of faith and religion, sexuality, race and ethnicity, and gender. And it was probably one of the best experiences that I have had. Why? Because every member of my team challenged me in different ways. And I remember one of my staff members, we had a one-on-one meeting, and the staff member pointed out that they wanted to focus on a lot of different projects, but they didn't feel supported, right, in many ways. So I think that communication goes a long way. Right now, we are seeing not only generational differences within the teams, but putting it out there, putting the information out there to your supervisor, to that leader that you report to. I know that I have had really great supervisors as well. And one of the best ways to go about change is communicating, right? And talking to that leader about, this is my leadership style. And I'm hoping, to maybe in the next meeting, if you allow me to maybe lead an agenda item or maybe talk about a particular topic. But I would say, bring it up. I think that in many occasions, we all have that issue of that we want to be seen and heard, right? And that entails making sure that we communicate that to those individuals.
Hi, Ava. So I am 42. I am about as white as a white person gets, Polish and German, and I work in the construction industry. I'm an engineer, and so I own part of the company. I've worked very hard to get here. I lead a team of engineers. It's a small company, and my team started at 3 and we're at 9. So I've had a phenomenal career. My bosses are men. Most of the people I work with are men, and almost all of them are white. Construction industry is so predominantly white. Even the women are mostly white as far as that goes. And I know, hiring engineers of color, first of all, in this construction industry is practically impossible because nobody wants to get that degree. But what I really wanted to give you that background a little bit, because I wanted to talk a little bit about what you had said about code switching and your authentic self. Because I certainly find myself in this industry avoiding those stereotypes of women talk too much, or they're bossy, or essentially a lot of the female, not so much race identified, but the female stereotypes. So how do you take that, adjusting how you are, what you say, who you show yourself to be, combined with that authentic self as you are leading a team and then also managing up to some extent? So what do you think about all of that, and how we make that happen?
Yes, thank you, Karen. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations for all your work. It sounds like you have a pretty nice career and have accomplished a lot in a predominantly male-dominated field, which is amazing. So I would say, Karen, that there are things, values that we have that are non-negotiable. We are never going to negotiate some things. So for example, I am never going to negotiate the time that I have with my kids. That's non-negotiable. And as women, we tend to we tend to have the stereotype of the family, the kids, that they can do the work because they're too busy with the family. But that's non-negotiable for me. And as a leader, my team needs to know that. And also as a leader, especially as a female leader, I've been told that I am overly empathetic as well. Overly empathetic.
Me too.
Overly empathetic. You know what? I don't care if people call me overly empathetic, because that's actually a skill. Not everybody has it. But I also, to be very honest, I also find that there are times when I need to play the game. Mm-hmm. Meaning that if I need to go into a meeting with executives, I need to play that game, and I need to make sure that I am conscious of the way I'm coming across, because I still need to make sure that I meet my goals and my outcomes, right? And there are things that is not a big sacrifice, right? Like I don't need to have the last word, and I love talking too. Like I love talking. I don't need to have the last word. I don't need to have the last say. I want to make sure that I go in with an agenda, and that I also code switch to that environment, into that space, because I have an agenda that I need to push forward, and that's completely fine. But there are the non-negotiables that I would never negotiate. For instance, my time with my family, if it interferes with my work. Like there are things that I'm never going to negotiate with anyone. It doesn't matter if they criticize me. Being authentic entails being non-negotiable at times.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
You keep going. You keep going.
I'm trying to bring all the ladies that I can into this
Yes.
field. They just, math and science, it's hard, right?
Yeah. Yep. And I do also, just one last thing, if you're looking for any additional employees, make sure that you go into social media and look up some of the affinity groups for like the engineers of like color, or like the different affinity groups. So that's where you get them, because I'm part of tons of like Facebook groups from like different affinities and associations.
Thank you so much. Will you be sending your presentation out for us to have the slides, or is that all your stuff?
I might be able to send some slides over if you like.
The whole I'm sorry, I'm dominating the conversation. If anybody else has questions, please. But your presentation was amazing, and I appreciate how hard you had to work to give it from Denver. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Karen. You keep doing great work.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Oh, go ahead.
One more question?
Yeah. So I do have a question. If you could speak to a time where you wanted a champion for a diversity and inclusion initiative or program, and you got pushback, and what they were really seeking was data-driven results and how can you provide that. Can you talk about a time, an example, and how you navigated that?
Yes. So part of being an inclusive leader is going to entail persistence. Why? Because when it comes to DEI work, many companies, many organizations do not have the budget. They just don't. They don't have the budget to implement a full-scale diversity and inclusion plan. So in my work in the Office of Intercultural Engagement, when I came in, there were a couple of us that worked in that office, and I immediately realized that if we were going to change the experiences of students of color and other underrepresented populations, that we needed to increase staffing, and we needed fiscal resources, and we also needed additional space. So I came in and I evaluated, held tons of sessions and listening sessions with a lot of different stakeholders, put a proposal together, and the proposal was denied. And however, I tend to be extremely persistent. I resubmitted the proposal 3 other times, and I even brought a copy of the proposal to the provost of the university, to the vice presidents, and anyone that could have a stake at the experiences of students of color. And I would say that after 3 years of pushing and rewriting proposals and providing the data, we finally were given the green light to grow the office. So we went from 2 people to 11 people in the office, additional spaces. I co-founded the LGBTQ+ Resource Center, additional funding, new furniture for the entire spaces that I was overseeing. So persistence is really, really key, but also making sure that you get in front of the people that have that power to give you what you want.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maricruz.
Awesome. So let me see the chat. Thank you. Great presentation. Thanks. Okay, well that's about it. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So thank you again for everyone that registered. We will continue to have Conexiones sessions Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Tomorrow's on networking, Thursday is on empowering women with data, and Friday is on the imposter complex. So visit our website, hpgm.org, if you haven't registered, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can register through there as well. So again, thank you, Eva, for this great session. It was really helpful to all of us, and that's why you're a mentor of mine. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Eva, again.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, bye-bye, everyone.